Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another edition of the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour. This is a show I've been looking forward to for an awful long time because I think I'm right in saying that this is the first guest we've had that's actually been physically here in my home in West Sussex. And it was 6 years ago that a guy called Louis Monero came over to my house and I interviewed him. Louis was very much involved in the International Academy of Consciousness, which are a group of people I've been very interested in their work for many, many years. And indeed, in my book, The Outer Body Experience, I had a whole section on the work of Aldo Vieira, who was the founder of that organization. And one of the guys that came along that day was Rodrigo Montenegro. And we had a quick chat then. And then this last summer, we met up again at Breaking Convention in London, the event that takes forward every 2 years. And again, it was a bizarre coincidence because I didn't know he was there at all. Myself and a couple of associates were just looking for somewhere to sit for a particular lecture. Now, remember, there are scores of lectures taking place right across the campus. And I go and sit quite right next to Rodrigo. You know, it's this kind of, oh, hi, how are you kind of thing. And it was extraordinary. So since then, I've been very keen to get Rodrigo on the show because he's doing some fascinating work in terms of the parameters of consciousness, the parameters of how the brain functions, and how that works with the out-of-body experience, lucid dreaming, and everything else. So he's a fascinating guy. Some of the work he's been doing is absolutely extraordinary. And I'll just give you a little bit of background about Montenegro now with Rodrigo. I'll be looking down and I'll be reading, or I'll try and read it in front of me. That'll probably be better, isn't it? Okay, so Rodrigo Montenegro is co-founder and CEO of Gamma Wave Technologies Limited. Rodrigo holds postgraduate diplomas in both neuropsychology, neuromodulation, and an MSc in neuroscience, and is currently following a research degree in sleep medicine and carrying research on non-ordinary states, expanding the frontiers of consciousness and sleep research. Rodrigo is a book author and has lectured internationally on the subject of non-ordinary states of sleep at INRIS, which is a group of organization from France that I know the guys in INRIS. It'd be interesting to chat about that, Rodrigo. Mind, Body and Soul, among others, since 2005, and has been featured in acclaimed documentaries. Indeed, both of us were involved in the recent documentary that Jade Shaw did, a previous guest on this show. He's worked in the field of consciousness research, working with institutions exploring the subject of consciousness research with such organizations as, again, the Scientific and Medical Network, which is also an organization I've been involved in for many years. So Rodrigo, welcome to Consciousness Hour.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very pleased to be in your show.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Again, let's everybody to know, Rodrigo is over in France, in Montpellier at the moment. So we have me in West Sussex, we've got Rodrigo in Montpellier, and we have our wonderful, as ever, Dia Nunez in the background there in Denver, Colorado. Right, okay. What I'd like to do initially is, I know that a lot of the people who listen to this podcast and watch the podcast are very aware of what we talk about when we talk about brainwaves and we talk about various states of brainwaves. What I'd like you to do firstly is to just give a very 5-minute or so background to exactly when we talk about brainwaves, what are we talking about, and what are the different types of brainwaves, and how do those brainwaves go through into consciousness and our perceptions. If you could do that, that would be really great.
Yes, absolutely. So brainwaves are just, one of the neurophysiological correlates associated with, perception and consciousness as a whole. And that just indicates certain types of occurrence related to, how the brains behave. So what we can see is, like, for example, when you are sleeping, you have a certain type of brainwave, and when you are awake, you have other types of brainwaves. Although that's very, very, I would say, simplistic in reality, because we can see, for example, that during REM and waking stage, you have certain types of brainwaves that can correlate. And although the conditions of, REM state, for example, the rapid eye movements that we perceive during sleep is phenomenologically speaking, very different from, the waking state. So those different brain waves indicate just, different types of conditions that, are associated with the brain. For example, when we talk about deep sleep, which is that condition of sleep that we are experiencing, specifically in the first stage of sleep, we are seeing mostly delta wave. And so, for example, when we are at the onset of sleep, we're seeing an onset of theta waves. And so all those, are characteristic, generally speaking. And so, for example, when we're talking about gamma wave or beta wave, they are more associated with cognition. Beta wave, like, for example, you are, trying to comprehend or understand something that you are reading. And the gamma waves are those very high frequency type of brain waves where you see, for example, that you have those peak of awareness and arousal, and are mainly associated during the waking state with intuition, perception, understanding. So that gives us a little bit of an overview of those characteristics. But of course, beyond that, there are a lot of different characteristics of those brain waves that are associated with, consciousness that we can, delve into going forward. But I hope that gives a very succinct and general overview of those brain waves.
Excellent, because I was quite surprised recently to read up that delta waves can be quite controversial. I hadn't realized that sometimes it's argued that because it's very similar, isn't it, to muscular movements. So when we move our eyes and we have saccades and everything else, it could actually be reported that these are actually delta waves. So I was quite intrigued by that. I wasn't aware of that. Now, I'm very interested in the work you're doing at the moment, the current direction of the work you're carrying out with Gamma Wave Technologies Limited. Now, I know you're a director or you're the owner of this particular organization. I'm very keen to know, what exactly are you doing there? What is this all about?
Yeah, so Gamma Wave Technologies is a newly found, startup. We started this, last July, and the objective of, Gamma Wave Technology is to, at the present moment, do a headband that will help with sleep, and specifically, non-ordinary states of sleep. So we are working with protocol and we're doing research to induce states that are non-ordinary. For example, a deep stage of sleep. When you are in deep sleep, we want to increment and enhance that deep sleep. What is not really well known is that as we age, deep sleep becomes more fragmented and incoherent. It's not as coherent as it is when we are younger. So what we are doing is that we are incrementing, stimulating the deep sleep, and that has a lot of application, because deep sleep is associated with physical recovery of the brain, is associated with your immunity, and so and memories as well. And so by stimulating the brain during the stage, you can increase the recovery of the brain, as well as increase your recovery overall. And that's what we are seeing. But with that, we want also to induce, and that would be a non-ordinary state of the deep sleep. But we also want to induce non-ordinary state of REM sleep, the rapid eye movement, which is one of the cycle of sleep. And for that, what we want to do is to work with lucid dreaming. So the objective of the company is really to allow us to test and to overcome the limitations that we have as consciousness to induce those states. And so because we are interested in non-ordinary states, we are looking as well at how our consciousness is affected by sleep. So let me give you an example. We know that there is an intricate relationship between how the brain behaves and how well you sleep. So the quality of your sleep has a direct effect on your ability to focus, your memory, your ability to have a better cognitive ability during the day. So it's intricately, connected. The better you sleep, the more your brain will perform at, higher levels of performance, the more your cognition is going to be bettered. And so what we are doing is that we are also, with this headband that we are building, and we are now building the 5th prototype, and We are, implementing new, technologies and doing research. But what we want to do is also to measure your cognitive ability during the day. So by measuring the state of focus, your state of flow, and measuring, for example, your capacity to meditate. And so with that help, then you will be able to benchmark your ability against long-term meditators. And so that's one as well of, the objective. So really looking at non-ordinary state and measuring those, non-ordinary state. That's overall the objective of, gamma wave technologies.
So it's going to be a headband, is it, that you wear while you're asleep? And is it wired in? I mean, I just understanding exactly what it's going to look like and how it would work even.
Yeah, so it's a wearable that you will put at sleep, and that will measure the quality of your sleep. So you will see with, the headband, the different stage of sleep that you have gone through during the night. But during the day, you could also put this headband, on your head to measure different states of, consciousness, like, different types of meditation. So for example, if we have like, tested long-term meditators within the Vipassana type of, tradition, and we see that there are certain correlates. So for example, they are able to induce gamma waves in the temporal lobe, for example. And so what we are going to allow you is to benchmark that ability against the ones that we are seeing in the brain of long-term meditators. So at the present moment, we have three, types of meditation that you can, measure yourself against. And that with the objective to allow you to be more objective about the state you are in and to perceive a little bit with more objectivity what's happening to you.
This is fascinating. So it allows you to give yourself immediate feedback as to how your brain is functioning, and at that moment, and you can adopt your action, or you can actually go inwards and look and think, how am I changing how I'm thinking and how my brain is functioning here? What would this be, for instance, if we could apply this if somebody was taking, psilocybin or dimethyltryptamine or anything else? Presumably we'd still have the same neurological feedback, wouldn't we? We'd know how these substances were then affecting how the brain was functioning as well. And you say as well, you can map the areas of the brain that are lighting up as well, because you mentioned before the temporal lobes, so you'll know that the temporal lobes are lighting up.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. So the idea is of benchmarking is that you have a database, that is, comprehensive enough for you to compare that, and that we will not have for, a DMT or psilocybin type of brain. But that's the objective going forward, is to look at different types of cognitive characteristics that we would like to measure and to be able to assess your own ability. Let's say, for example, that, we are showing that, during very strong type of, or very focused type of concentration, you are showing, for example, those delta wave in the frontal lobe. So with that type of, device, we could measure your level of focus and different things. And that's the objective. The objective is really, to look at maximizing our brain performance. We're using evidence-based approach and give you context in terms of the performance that you are having yourself.
Wow. So what are the implications here for such things as lucid dreaming, for instance? Because it was immediately a little light went on in my head, and I thought this could be really applied to lucid dreaming in phenomenal ways. Can you expand a little bit upon that? Or explain first what we mean by lucid dreaming, and then we'll
of course, yeah. So the idea is certainly of the headband is looking at, inducing non-ordinary states through technology. The idea is to also induce the condition of lucid dream. And why is this important? I will give you a little bit of context, because lucid dream is that capacity that we have to be aware during our sleep. So a lot of people can experience that, ability once in their lifetime. And it's when you are within the dream, able to control the elements of the dream. You are aware of the fact that you are dreaming. and that you can control it. So that's the level of awareness. And there is one specific characteristic of this, is that the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is activated during, lucid dreaming. So it's an area of the brain that is associated with your ability to recover memories, past memories, to give contextual meaning to the experience. So if you see, like let's say a frog, you're not afraid of it because you have absolutely no idea what it is. It's a frog. You remember your past experience and you do that. So that's one of the characteristics of dreaming, and you have that heightened awareness. Now, if we look at our brain evolution as a species in terms of our capacity to induce those states, what we see is that we look at research in lucid dreaming, and we look at those very experienced lucid dreamers that have been inducing this for 15, 20 years. And what we see is that in average, they can induce 3 to 5, lucid dream per week in average. So that's very, very little in terms of the amount of dreams that you can achieve during one night or even a week. Because you can sleep and have, during the cycles of sleep, you can sleep and enter into REM stage 5 to 8 times, depending on, the time. So what we see is that even though those, lucid dream experienced lucid dreamers are able to induce those states 3 to 5 times per week, that's a very little result in terms of the capacity that we have, even though you can say that those lucid dreamers are people who have tested all the types of techniques. So what we see is that our brain has not reached, in terms of evolution, a condition where this is more accessible. And this is why technology is so important, because it will help us leap forward and stimulate those conditions in a way that we can say would lead you to induce a lucid dream more often than not. And so that's very important, because for many types of, for different types of, cognition or different types of, capacity that we have in terms of our cognition, we see that we have limitations. We have limitations in terms of, our ability to apprehend, objectively information. We see that people are, subjected to, manipulation online, and, that bots can initiate, a type of hype in the internet that people follow without thinking. So our ability to think, if we think about this in terms of evolution, we can say that it has really been stimulated by the Enlightenment years, 500 years ago. So this is when we were starting to use, the forebrain, the prefrontal cortex, making associations of idea, trying to understand. But what we see today is that we are still subjected very much to manipulation, and we are still very much having difficulty with objectivity. So now imagine that condition of lucid dreaming, that as a society we are more open to do. We are just starting, because if we were going to talk about lucid dreaming 500 years ago, we would still be, like philosophers at the time, restricted to talk about it. So it was not something that was really well known. And that's the reason for technology, because we need to stimulate that condition and really try to objectify that condition. And that's a second condition of why that's so important in terms of why use technology, why we need to have those technologies to help us. And the reason is that we need to be better at objectifying that condition. Let me give you an example that would be, maybe a little bit help us to contextualize what I mean. So we have a very specific neurophysiology associated with, each condition. And because I have been doing so much research, and with gamma wave technologies, we have been, doing the research, and on myself and others, what I have perceived recently is that what I thought were my lucid dreams were non-REM lucid dreams. So that's a very specific condition, because I was never very much inclined to have lucid dream. And lucid dream occurs, of course, during the REM cycle of sleep. So it's when you have a very specific characteristics of the brain where you have this rapid eye movement, the REM, type of reality. But you can also achieve lucidity during non-REM stage. And that's a reality that, is conveyed by science. But when I was assessing my, the data was happening in my brain, I was perceiving that I was much more inclined to have lucidity during non-REM type of stage. When I thought previously, even though I knew the difference between, lucid dreaming and, lucid non-REM dreams, from a phenomenological standpoint, what I perceive is that still my objective perception of this was really affected by my perception of the reality, by my acceptance of what I believe was, lucid dreaming. And so the technology here will allow us to become more objective for each of those states. If that does make sense.
I have a question to ask you as you're talking.
Yes.
And you talk about the evolutionary process of the human being. Has it ever occurred to you guys that through this band that you're creating, that it could literally create the evolutionary process of the percentage of brain that we use? We only use 10%. And as you were talking, I was just like, wow, this could really jumpstart people using more of their brains, giving them more capacity to heal themselves. And I know that may sound fantastical to some people, but our brains are fantabulous in reference to our power. And if we opened up a different percentage of the element of creativity, we could heal ourselves. We could do what the yogis do. And I know that people have talked about that. Is that also your goal?
Absolutely. We have to remember one thing, Dia, that is very, very important here. That's something that Nikola Tesla said in the past. He said that science is a perversion of itself as long as its ultimate goal is not the betterment of humanity. So what we want to do is exactly that. We want to use that headband to improve, to jumpstart, to stimulate your ability. We were talking about lucid dreaming. You can see people with 20 years of practice and not having the ability to induce that condition. Why is that? It's because our brain as a species is not inclined to have that capacity. You have some people who would have, certain genetic predisposition to that. There's no doubt about this. But how can we better, the predisposition of the others to induce that? And that's why we need technology. That we don't need technology to become dependable or dependent. We need technology to free us, to test us, to put technology back into the social context in a way that it will help us. So yes, what we want to do with that technology, and that's very clear, is that we want to help you. There is a law in neuroscience, it's called the Webb law. So that means that, neurons firing together tend to continue firing together. Why is that? It's because you are connecting, neurons, and those neurons just, do what they do. They continue with, with that connection, and that induce that condition. So the Ebb's law is exactly that. And so if we can stimulate that condition of lucid dream, then you will be more inclined to induce it yourself. And that's the same for meditation. If you can, for example, achieve certain state and perceive exactly the sensation, the perception, the qualia of your innate perception and how you achieve to do that, and then it becomes a condition that becomes more normalized, because you can not only objectively perceive that that's the right way to go, that's how, the yogis that are doing this for 10, 15, 20 years are achieving. And so you can then just, ditch the technology. Technology should be something that we overcome, but it should be there to help us. So yes, that's exactly the objective. And I would say even more, Dia, is that the technologies that we are working on, they indeed, increase the upregulation, the genetic upregulation of the neurons associated with those, areas where we see are, relevant, for example, during lucid dreaming. So the objective is exactly this, to help, stimulate and awaken, humanity to different things. And look, I would even say this, if I'm allowed. I know sometimes I talk a lot, but I think that's the important thing here is that we don't want to also influence people to believe in anything. We want them to, through those experiences that they can achieve for themselves, get their own conclusion. So we can say that lucid dreaming is a doorway to other dimension. Yes, we can say that's my perception, that's my belief. However, I'm not inclined to try to convince anyone about that. But those experiences, when they are more, when they become naturally part of one's existence, then you will naturally open your perception of the reality and your own interpretation of what reality is.
That was really interesting on so many different levels. The idea, we're talking here about neuroplasticity, we're talking about the idea of Hebb's law and the idea of how neurons can be almost trained to have certain routes. The more we do things, the more. And I'm intrigued here about the idea of post-humanism almost, that we are using technology. It's technology that we effectively are creating because we have evolved to create the technology, which we're then using that technology to facilitate a jumpstart in the terms of how our brains function, which is allowing us to move into incredible altered states of consciousness whereby we perceive alternate realities that are not consensual reality, but are just as real as these. Now, one of the things you sent me a week or so ago really blew my mind, the work you're doing. And it was very much your paper on the vibrational states and the relationship between the vibrational state and the out-of-body experience or lucid dreaming. And I'd love you to tell us a little bit more about this, because this paper blew me away. It was extraordinary. So if you could just explain a little bit about this, and I'm sure Dia will find this fascinating as well.
Yeah, so the paper that was presented at Journal Auto Recherca is an attempt really to try to look at the vibrational state as a novel neurophysiological correlate. So we have different neurophysiological states. The waking state, you have the REM state that we were talking about, and you have the non-REM state. So those are the natural occurring states that are recognized by science. And so what I have done is that I will try to look at the vibrational state, which is a very, very specific state that is perceived at certain moments of sleep, and is very, very peculiar and specific. And I was doing research into that. And to clarify what the vibrational state is important as well, because there are lots of misconception and misunderstanding about the vibrational state. People refer to the vibrational state as tingling, shiver sensations, but this is not the vibrational state. The vibrations of the vibrational state can have, before the vibrational state, such type of sensation of a movement of energy that has a certain type of tingling, vibration. But the vibrational state in itself is the end result of those vibrations, is a state of intense positive resonance of the being. And so what I was presenting there is the idea of is trying to show what we would need from a scientific standpoint to present in terms of scientific data to accept and acknowledge the vibrational state as a new state of being. And through that, I was presenting and making a few assumptions that are associated with out-body experience, because what happens is that often the vibrational state is seen at the onset of the out-body experience. So It's not always the case. You can have an out-body experience without the vibrational state, but sometimes you perceive those intense vibrations that lead to the condition of exteriorization. And so because the vibrations are also seen during lucid dream and during sleep paralysis, that condition that is experienced when you are in sleep and you wake up and you are unable to move, I was, presenting ideas that are associated with, the neurophysiological correlates that are associated with those states. So I was presenting ideas to show not only, how the out-body experience is related to those, conditions, and how those conditions of lucid dreaming and sleep paralysis, or ISP, isolated sleep paralysis, are indeed protoforms or forms that lead, or conditions or phenomena that leads to out-body experience. And so I was presenting, theories, associated with this. And my theory is that the condition of out-body is associated with a condition of motor inhibition. So what happens during REM and isolated sleep paralysis is that there is a motor inhibition of the nervous system. What happens is that we have a center in the hypothalamus called the ventrolateral preoptic nerve or nucleus, and that is, the area of the brain that regulates the condition of REM and REM off states. And so that condition as well is associated with different areas of the brain, like the pons, where you have the locus coeruleus. It's a little tiny part of the brain, and you have also the dorsal raphe. There are also with that condition of REM on and off. So all those mechanisms are associated with that condition that lead then to the condition of motor inhibition. And so what we see and what I present there is really preliminary data of very of different conditions that are associated with that motor inhibition that is perceived at the onset of an out-body experience. So when you're going to sleep, you have people who are able to induce the out-body experience. And what we have tested how the brain of those people, report to that condition. And we report there very, very specific physiological conditions that I discuss about in this article. And we can, delve into it, but really, in a sense, what we are demonstrating, what we are showing and demonstrating with, very preliminary, data, is that we are able to tap into our nervous system to induce the condition of REM state at sleep onset. And that is data that is known in narcoleptic patients. So narcoleptic patients, what they have is that they have a condition of what is called SOREM, sleep onset REM. What is that? The REM stage that is occurring at the very early cycle of sleep. Normally, you don't have, REM. You don't experience the REM state in the first 1 hour, 1 hour and a half of sleep. However, narcoleptic patients, what they have is that they have this state of SOREM, where we see a REM, condition, and where this motor inhibition is induced. Okay, but what we see is within certain conditions of experienced out-body inducers, or people who are able to induce the out-body experience, we see those same type of condition. And we see also another thing, which I present as well there in the article very succinctly, is the condition that we call OBE catalepsy. So that's a very specific type of neurophysiological correlates as well. And that's what I see. That's what I present there. But in a sense, okay, what we are showing is that this condition can be stimulated, can be achieved, and it's a condition of control of the nervous system. And just let me finish with this. I mean, neuroscience today is reviewing our ability that we have to control the peripheric nervous system. Before, we were thinking and that was established as a law in neuroscience, and that we cannot influence directly through our own command, our own volition, our ability to change and modulate the nervous system. But today there are lots of different research that are starting to show that we are indeed capable of doing that. And what I'm showing with that article is that, yes, indeed, we are seeing here conditions that show that the person is able to indeed influence that condition of REM state without the pathologies associated. Because remember that REM is associated with narcolepsy, and narcolepsy, of course, is a psychiatric, is a parasomnia, and so it's a psychiatric condition.
Wow, the implications of that is huge, isn't it? It's absolutely massive. It's intriguing beyond words. So in terms of moving this forward now, because there's so many exciting areas that we could actually pursue here, what I'm interested in is moving along to the ideas that lucid dreaming and sleep paralysis and everything else seem to imply, we touched upon before, the idea that we are in some way perceiving alternate realities, or realities that are non-ordinary mental states that are opening up what Huxley would call the doors of perception into other areas. Now, do you believe from your work that we'd be able to work on these in terms of tangible results from experimental purposes to actually show that these states are much more interesting than just some kind of hallucination, in raised commas?
Yes, absolutely. I think that that's part of the direction of the work that I'm carrying. But I'm carrying this as neuroscientific, and as such, I'm looking at the neurophysiological correlates. So I think that we have to look at what's happening in the brain and what are the conditions that are different and peculiar that haven't been seen, that haven't been researched. The vibrational state is one of those conditions. So this is why, for example, with the headset that we are developing, you are able to measure your vibrational state. And so the vibrational state is key there to those conditions of sleep paralysis and lucid dreaming, as it shows that indeed, when you are able to induce the vibrational state in those states, you are certainly opening yourself to a different set of perception. And those perception, shall I say, are not at all related to hallucination and are not at all correlated with the condition and phenomena or lucid dreaming or isolated sleep paralysis. Why is that? It's because of the condition of lucidity. When you are having, for example, an out-body experience, the experience is not related to a condition of hallucination or perception that is, abstract and more like a incoherent set of things. It's the out-body experience in itself, the experience that you have when you have one, is very much associated with a level of lucidity that is very clear. You perceive reality, you're coherent, you can think, you can rationalize. And so what is very interesting is, and that relates to the idea that ISP and lucid dreams are portal forms of out-body experience, is that when you shift to the OBE through, for example, doing the vibrational state, you perceive that level of lucidity, but the vibrational state that we can measure and induce, as the research has shown, is a state of high gamma wave. And those gamma waves, they are very much associated with what? Hyper arousal, hyper lucidity, hyper connectivity, hyper association. One of the characteristics of gamma waves is that they allow you to think. You're making connections with different areas of the brain. And so you are making association of ideas. And so what we see, and that's related in science, is that there is an increase in arousal, in lucidity, in consciousness when you have more gamma waves. So if you have gamma waves during the vibrational state and that leads you to the OBE, then you are showing that OBE in itself cannot be a condition of hallucination. Most specifically so because the correlates that you see during the vibrational state are always the same. They are related to a condition of extreme focus, associated with delta brainwave, and hyper gamma wave. And so that's the consideration here. So we are just, showing the scientific community that was before associating, for example, those vibration has, motor hallucination, to show that, hey, it cannot be, because we have very specific, very coherent, reproducible, and constant neurophysiological correlates in the brain of those doing the VS. So the vibrational state. So yes, we are just starting to show that, okay, if we are lucid, if we are expressing lucidity, what is the reality of those, experience? What is the reality of those phenomena? And so that's an interrogation mark, because as a scientist, I'm not going to say to you what it is and what it is. I can't say to you that, yes, that's my belief, that, that's an alternate reality. Can I prove that? No. However, if you have your experience, maybe, we can as well, discuss about the objectivity of that experience. And so then we can also start, because we know better how those things happen in the brain, how work with the brain, to start to be more inclined to have protocols and experiment that will test those possibility of, it being a reality beyond the one that we are experiencing now. I hope I was clear.
No, totally. I mean, there were so many things, again, triggering in my brain there, in the sense that the implications here for instance, under these conditions, we get over the binding problem within the brain, and the idea that in some way the brain can communicate non-locally across the whole of the brain, because of course one of the major problems, as people may be aware of from my writings, is the idea of how we have a feeling of simultaneity, when effectively there are different parts of the brain processing different areas. And in fact, even in our visual cortex, there are different, in the visual systems, there's different parts of the brain monitoring different parts and communicating very, very quickly, which suggests possibly other communication channels. And I'm reminded here of something called the calcium wave, which is, I think, that probably you and I need to talk to at some stage in the future. But one of the things that you do talk about, which again intrigues me a lot, is this concept of the parabrain. What do you mean by that term? And I think this probably goes back to the work of the IAC maybe, and there's sort of similarities there.
Yes, so the parabrain is really a theory that I've tried to contextualize in terms of neuroscience. So I'm working on a theory that would explain, consciousness in a way that is differentiated and that would include these type of phenomena like lucid dreaming, all body experience. And so the parabrain comes, or the reality of that of that idea comes really from the concept that if consciousness is not associated with the brain, how does consciousness links to the brain to allow the conscious aspect of the brain? Because of course we are receiving input from the physical reality. We are measuring our biological suit, our physical body is perceiving the reality through physical means. And so how is this translated into the consciousness, the ultimate reality? And so that where the parabrain comes. It would be the interface between the consciousness and the brain. So, and that concept really relates a little bit with the work of Henry Bergson of the Elan Vital as being an essential condition for consciousness, proposing it to be the basis of consciousness when we are perceiving reality. But what is much more interesting for our type of subject is that the parabrain is also perceived, his reality is perceived, for example, when you are going out of the body. So for example, you remember, probably you have seen the film Doctor Strange, where Doctor Strange goes out of the body. So when you go out of the body, that's exactly the perception that you have. And then what you perceive is that you perceive a form like, one of paraphysical nature going out. of the brain. And that would be, the physical reality of that, parabrain. And that's as well, perceived with different types of, neurophysiological correlates that are associated with those moments of, the exteriorization. But that condition, that structure would lead you to expand your mind at the condition in pre-OBE. So you can sometimes, for example, when you are in lucid dream, be in a state where you start to have an expansion of reality. You perceive your body, you perceive, that, you are in the physical body, but you start to perceive that there is an expansion of that, of your consciousness. And that leads sometimes to the condition of, the out body experience. And that would also explain why the parabrain would be in certain moment in a condition of transition between the out body experience and the physical reality, as we can see during lucid dreaming or isolated sleep paralysis. So it seems that those states are a condition of opening of the doorways of perception that Oxley, was referring to, and leading to an expansion of the self. And that would also explain why you have dreams of telepathy, where you have dreams where, there is a kind of perception of, a shadow, reality that you are somehow perceiving as an external reality, but at the same time, this is become entangled with your own nature, because you haven't crossed that boundary yet. You are not out of the body. And so that's very interesting as well, because at the present moment, we cannot, those conditions are, for example, the clear light, and that is, perceived during lucid dreaming. You have certain, lucid dreamers, they are within lucid dreaming. There is no dream at all. So they are just in a condition of clear light. That is a condition associated with, Buddhism type of, meditation, of, trying to achieve the clear light during sleep. And so you are most possibly in a condition of REM. Sometimes you are transitioning from a condition of REM to that condition of clear light. But from there, you can also transition to the out body experience. But that condition would explain a little bit some of the characteristics of dreams that are not really explained by today's neuroscience. Neuroscience, as I was saying, explains the onset, the REM on condition associated with very specific areas of the brain. And when you have, like, for example, when you have a cat and you cross-sect the anatomy, the areas associated with REM, the cat will not dream any longer. So you need to explain that. You need to explain why, REM state can, induce those very peculiar type of, reality there.
I have a question to ask you. And this
Yes.
thing, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to say it. I'm thinking about the process of death.
Yeah.
And you talk about all of these processes as us as healthy human beings. And it feels like that process of one leaving their body, there's like activity in the brain that is like the power brain. They're like in this continual altered, powerful state. And I've read stories about people being very ill and crossing over and seeing the dead come to them. I remember when my grandmother was alive, and even trauma to the body, like surgery. When she had surgery, which was many years ago, her brother, who had gotten hung, actually came to her in a dream. I mean, these are phenomenal, like, experiences. So would you say that with people who are in particular body trauma type of states, that the power brain is like super duper activated, and makes the experiences that you're speaking about even more expanded? And why do you think that is? Is it because they're leaving this world? Because technically, if we really want to be honest, our body's a hindrance. It's a border. We're not able to experience certain things. I would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah,
Yes.
can I add here as well, because it was one of the questions I was going to be asking, which dovetails beautifully into Dia. We must be telepathic here, because I guess we've been doing this so long, we probably have become telepathic. But one of the things that it really interests me is the implications of your work for the near-death experience, my cheating the ferryman hypothesis, and everything else as well, because this is really doing the science, and it's really what we've been wanting. And I was so delighted to hear Henri Bergson reference there. I'm delighted to hear you referencing Aldous Huxley and obviously C.D. Broad and everybody else, and the idea of the brain as an attenuator. So you've got lots of questions. You've got about 10 minutes left, but we've really left you with a real powerful one to finish with, I think.
So let's synthesize like this. We have to see isolated sleep paralysis and lucid dreaming has, transitional state to the out body state. So that transitional state is mostly or could mostly be induced by the vibrational state. Has a new state that would lead to that condition of, the exteriorization of consciousness out of the body. Okay. In ISP and LD, isolated sleep paralysis and lucid dreaming, you may be in a condition of partial exteriorization of the consciousness. And so what happens is that in those states, you don't necessarily perceive reality with the same level of objectivity that you can perceive during out-body experience. And that is shown by, the correlation of, the neurophysiological correlation of the vibrational state. Vibration there leads to a condition of lucidity that can induce that condition of hyperlucidity, because you see that when people are having the vibrational state, even if it's spontaneously, it's often related to a condition of lucidity, and that leads to the out-body experience, okay? Not always, okay? So what we see sometimes as dreams is just, and that's the second point here, is just a condition that is entangled with a lack of lucidity. We are not experienced to achieve that condition of hyper-focus that is the condition that is perceived during out-body experience. And so that's one thing. And to come back to that, reality of, near-death experience, what we see as well is that during near-death experience, I mean, not necessarily always during near-death experience, but there are certain experiences with rats where you cut the head of the poor rat there. And what you see is that you see a peak in the gamma wave just, during a few, minutes there, a few seconds actually. And so there are some experiments that also show that peak of, gamma wave during, the out body or just preceding the out body experience. So for example, that was shown by, Charles Start and his experiment with music.
Can I just jump in here? Can I just jump in here? This is intriguing. So what you're saying is that the Gimo Borgigin experiments at the University of Michigan with the rats, that was gamma in the first place.
Yes.
And what she saw in that experiment is reproduced when people are about to go into out-of-body states?
So so wow. At least, well, first of all, remember that at the present moment where, the research, at least my research stand, is that we see that the vibrational state induces very high gamma waves, above, 60, and in some occasions up to 200 hertz. It's one occasion. But in average is much above that 60 hertz. And Charles Start, also reported that type of gamma wave. And of course, the vibrational state is associated with gamma wave, and gamma wave is associated with lucidity and out-body experience. So we can say that that condition of high gamma wave above the gamma wave that you see in lucid dreaming, because you see also gamma wave around 40 hertz during lucid dreaming, is associated with that condition of hyperlucidity. Okay, that leads to the out-body experience, and that is also reported during near-death experience, at least in those experiments. So now to come back to the experiential reality that we were talking about, yes, sometimes, those states, as we have seen universally from millennia, discussion about, how, sleep states can be a door of perception. Actually, you have works of, theological works that were saying this as well, but that were saying that this was a doorway to demonic activity, right? So this is why we have never really developed this, because it was suppressed. If you look at the Middle Age, people who were trying to do this, what were happening to them? that would have a near-death experience, a final one, because that would, be, dead. And so if you look at even in the Enlightenment years, when we were talking about Descartes' theory of, the brain, the machinery, he was saying, look, we cannot discuss about the psyche because it's the soul. We are only going to discuss about the brain because the brain, we can't talk about this. It's physical, it's a physical reality. Nobody can condemn us. But certainly what we see is that we are perceiving here that there are commonalities in terms of this reality that may lead us certainly to future experiment, and that's what I want to do, to prove that those conditions has, objective, realities. And so we see to respond a little bit to what Bia was saying, is that the phenomenology, the experience of, meeting someone is sometimes very clearly, a condition of out-body experience, but is seen as, a lucid dream or, a fluke. But let's remember something, and it's going back a little bit to what you were saying, Anthony, is we have had this knowledge for eons. If we look at the works of Plato, and we look at what he was saying, Plato wasn't referring to, some type of, subjective reality. He was talking really about an objective reality there. And the fact is that, a lot of philosophers says, that the demon, the daemon, and is an internal reality. In my perception, the work of Plato clearly stipulate that has, an external, objective, ontological reality. And why is that? If you look at, one of his, work, which is, the True Earth, where he says that people there were living in another type of Earth that were, a condition of reality that we would experience when we would die. But in reality, what we see is that out-body experience leads you to achieve those experiences.
One of the things that I was reading one of your interviews recently, and you mentioned who you would like to have dinner with, and you mentioned a dinner with Plato and Aristotle.
Yes.
And I was thinking that wouldn't it be wonderful if you and I could have dinner with Plato? Wouldn't it be an experience and a half, I think. We'd probably dine in Plato's cave and have a meal there, I think. Right, well, I think we'd worked it out to almost perfect timing. So I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of people out there that are going to be really intrigued and fascinated by your work, what you're doing, and how profoundly important it is in terms of paradigm change, possibly in terms of our understanding of the mind-brain problem, understanding Chalmers' problem of consciousness. You're doing it and you're working with it. So how can people check out your work? How can they contact you? How can they read more of your material? Because I'm sure there's going to be an awful lot of people that have been wanting to do that.
Well, first of all, I mean, I've just published, an article that is really, giving, in a sense, a little bit of the neurophysiological realities that we were talking, that is associated with, ISP and lucid dreaming. And so I really delineate there, the direction of, the work for us to be able to present in a scientific manner the vibrational state has a novel, neurophysiological state. Now, saying that, it doesn't mean necessarily that it will be recognized as, an alternate reality, but there will certainly need to recognize the neurophysiological reality of that state, and that's going to be difficult. But so I would suggest, anyone that is interested to look at this. And of course, I have other, papers that I'm, preparing. I have a lot on my hands, specifically because, I'm the CEO of, Gamma Wave Technologies, and we want to develop that headband also to carry more research. But I'm going to publish now in September, hopefully, a peer review research on the vibrational state, looking at all the neurophysiological correlates in more detail. I have another research that is going to look at the OBE research to date, where I am confronting, the limitations of about 35 theories that explain out-body experience. Today in neuroscience, there is about 35 theories that are different that explain out-body experience. So how is that possible, you ask me? And we are doing a research as well with in partnership with the ISNOE, the Noetic Institute, the Swiss Noetic Institute, where we are researching a very, very peculiar and very experienced a person that induce out-body experience at will, and we're looking at the neurophysiological correlates, and that's really going to be very interesting because he does out-body experience in a very different that I do, and I've been learning with him a lot, and so that shows how complex is that. And I also would like to present more research into this motor inhibition hypothesis that I've presented there in the article. And so, yeah, more is to come. If you'd like to stay in touch, you can contact Gamma Wave Technology, so in our webpage, and say hi and express your interest in the headband that we are developing. If you are an investor, be welcome to contact as well, because as you know, those things, require a little bit of, the material paradigm, to be, to come to life.
Wonderful. So when we upload onto YouTube, I'm sure that Dia will actually put all the contact details so people can contact, because the work you're doing is absolutely fascinating and extremely important. Right. Okay, Rodrigo, thank you so much. It's been a fascinating hour.
Thank you so much as well.
Okay.
Anthony and Dia for inviting me.
Absolutely. Without Dia, this would not happen. And we always, she is the person that makes the wheels work in the background. Our next guest, right? Our next guest next time for next month, it will be the second Sunday of the month. And it will be a similar theme, but this time from more the experiential, when we have a fascinating guest called Kaz Coronel, who's an internationally famous DJ, who's also experienced some fascinating out-of-body experiences, and various other things as well. So Kaz is going to be a fascinating future guest. And by the way, Kaz, although she probably may mention it or may not, is a direct descendant of Benedict Spinoza, the philosopher. So we have somebody here who has links to really deep philosophy, but we're going to be talking music. We're going to be talking so many issues. So everybody, thanks again for listening in, and hopefully we will see you all in a month's time. Check it up on Dia's H2O Network website on YouTube, where you've got this interview and you've got all the other interviews that I've done in the past, and I'll be uploading this interview onto my website in the next few days. But thanks for spending an hour with us, and we look forward to seeing you again in a month's time. Okay, thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.